We're going to go ahead and get started. We're going to go back to the book of Proverbs. The book of Proverbs. We've been going through this in different ways. Of course, the first 8 or so chapters, we pretty well went through it verse by verse, as a lot of that was very much contextual, right? There was sections where you'd read half a chapter or a whole chapter. It was very much related. And then when we got to about chapter 10, we changed gears a little bit and we started just kind of covering individual proverbs versus, going through the whole chapter. Because as you look at it, from chapter 10 on, it's very much about individual sayings, individual proverbs, advice, and things along those lines. But what we did do is we wanted to still try to keep it in topic, and so we spent 3 lessons, I think it was, talking about how you're using your mouth, right? And we talked a lot about that, the wisdom that's given, know when to not speak, know when you should speak, know who to speak up for, make sure that the things you're speaking are honest. And then we kind of talked a lot about the opposing side of that. What happens when you open your mouth and you shouldn't? Or how the fool uses his mouth, or how the wicked uses his mouth. And there's just a lot that the book of Proverbs had to say about that. Now what we want to do this afternoon, this evening, is we want to talk about the opposite of that. Instead of talking about how you're using your mouth to speak, we want to talk about how you're using your ears, right? And the way I would say it is this: are you listening? Or you might say, did you hear? Or are you hearing? Are you going to listen? Maybe a good way to say it, right? As we think about these verses, what I want you to focus on as we read these is what the book of Proverbs has to say about hearing. And I'm just going to tell you, we'll just get this out of the gate. Just say this right out of the gate. When I say hearing, and when the Bible talks about hearing, it doesn't just mean, did the sound physically go in your ear? It really means, did you hear it, understand it, and act on it, right? I think oftentimes the way we use the word hear is, did you hear the sentence that I just said? And you may sit there and go, yeah. Well, what did I say? I don't remember. Or something about listening, but I didn't honestly really make all the connections, right? That's not the type of hearing that we're talking about. We're talking about hearing, understanding, and heeding what you heard, right? It even goes beyond. Have you ever heard the term active listening? Because we can listen. But active listening represents that I'm engaged in this conversation. I'm not just waiting for you to be quiet so I can say what I want to say. That's how, I shouldn't say most, that's how a lot of us hear, is we're listening with the intent to say something as soon as we can, right? And what happens with that is that if you're not careful, you don't truly hear what the person is saying, right? You get the concept of what they said, but you really weren't paying enough attention to really get it, because you were focused on, are they done? Are they done? Are they going to pause? Because I really want to say this, right? So that's the difference between listening and active listening, because in active listening, I'm trying to set that aside. I'm actually paying attention to what you're saying. I'm trying to process what you're saying with the intent of understanding your point of view. By the way, understanding your point of view doesn't have to mean that I agree with it, but I'm trying to understand it, right? That is part of what we're talking about. That's part of what we're going to talk about tonight. It's a big part. But I think the hearing and the stuff that I want to talk about tonight is both active listening. You're listening, you're comprehending, you're really trying to understand it. But you're also going to do something about it. It's going to have an impact on your life. You're going to let it actually alter and impact what you do. Or I should flip it around and say, you're going to have to consciously decide that what you just heard, you don't want to impact your life. Because sometimes what you hear and what you come to understand, you might look at that and go, yeah, I understand what you're saying, but I don't think God would be very happy if I had that impact my life. Make sense? Are you actively listening? Okay, good. Okay. So I'm going to start with some verses we already read, and I'm not going to go over the full context, but I just want to start with this one. I think it's a good place to start. In Proverbs chapter 2, verse 1, he says this, "My son, if thou wilt receive my words and hide my commandments with thee, so that thou incline thine ear unto wisdom and apply thine heart to understanding. Yea, if thou criest after knowledge and liftest up thy voice for understanding, if thou seekest her as silver, searchest for her as for hid treasures, then shalt thou understand the fear of the Lord and find the knowledge of God." Now, we covered those verses already, but I think it's important to look at that when we start to think about this idea of listening or hearing, right? Verse 1 may not use the word hear, but it's implied in the word receive. My son, if thou wilt receive my words. Because this father can stand here and say everything he wants to. But if the person he's speaking to, if the son that he's speaking to won't receive them, then there's no value there. At least for the son. He's not receiving the value. That receiving it is that idea of, son, will you hear me? And will you apply it to your life? Will you receive it? So one thing I want to say as we read through some of these, you may not actually hear the word listen or hear. But there are some of these verses that give that idea of, will you receive it? And I think that's very much the same idea as when sometimes you hear or we say, you know, man, please hear what I'm saying, right? It's the same concept. So the son here is pleading, or the father is here pleading with the son, "Wilt thou receive my words, so that thou incline thine ear unto wisdom," right? Actively, intentionally, have your ear out for wisdom. I want to hear it, I want to be perceptive to it, and I want to receive it. And I say this because even though he's going to start to get into crying after it and lifting up your voice for it and seeking it as silver, it actually started with the idea of, will you incline your ear to wisdom, right? If you haven't got it yet, although we started with the mouth, wisdom usually starts with the ear. Or the eyes if you're reading. But it's the same concept. You don't gain wisdom by opening your mouth. You gain wisdom by hearing, seeing, studying, right? So, I wanted to read these verses first as that plea from this Father to the Son. Receive what I'm saying and incline your ear unto wisdom. Now there's verses that we could read, but I'm going to take from that and we're going to jump ahead a few chapters here. And I want to look at Proverbs chapter 10. Proverbs chapter 10, verse 8 says this. Proverbs chapter 10, verse 8. The wise in heart will receive commandments, but a prating fool shall fall. You're going to see this a lot in these verses that we cover. And it's this idea of those that will hear wisdom, that will hear instruction, that will hear reproof and rebuke. Those people will be counted as wise. Those that refuse to receive, those that refuse to accept rebuke, those that refuse to listen and incline their ear for wisdom, they will be proven to be fools. So, are you going to be wise and willing to receive instruction and wisdom and commandments? Or are you going to harden your heart, you're going to harden your mind and say, you can't tell me what to do. I don't have to listen to you. Unfortunately, that is the attitude of a lot of people, right? And if we're honest with ourselves, sometimes it's our own attitude, right? Bad days, bad weeks, bad months. We can get into that position. We stop listening. We stop receiving what's given. And by the way, every time we stop listening and every time we stop receiving, it has further downstream impacts. In this verse, it's talking about, will you receive the commandments? Man, if you stop receiving the commandments, you got a lot more problems coming your way. And by the way, when I say commandments, I don't mean the things I might tell you to do. This Bible is talking about if you stop receiving the commandments of God, you got a whole nother set of problems coming. So, what'll it be, right? Are you going to be wise in heart and receive commandments? Or are you going to be like a prating fool and fall? Okay. There's a lot of verses, and so I'm having to try to, I want to be careful and pick and choose here wisely. I'm going to come back to one. I'm going to skip the one in Proverbs chapter 11. And let's go to Proverbs chapter 13. Because I think this is along the same lines. And I told you you're going to start to see it pretty frequently here. Proverbs chapter 13 verse 1 says, a wise son heareth his father's instruction, but a scorner